Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the CM Mentors podcast. My name is Matt Graves. My co-host each week is Kyle Grandell. What's up, Kyle?
Hey, Matt. Thanks for the introduction. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening as well. We got a great guest today. Welcome back to season 2, of course. We're having a great time. Awesome season so far. Today we have Patrick Reiser. So he's the principal Reiser Cost Consultants. He's also in commercial real estate doing estimation cost valuation. He's got a BA in integrated science and tech. He's also going to be the 2024 NACA conference speaker. That's coming up this year. You excited to have him here?
Two of them guys in a row. Two long years in a row.
with that said, though, Matt, let's jump into our sponsor first, and then we'll start shopping with Patrick.
Yeah, this week's show sponsor is Alt CMO again. Alt CMO is the go-to fractional CMO agency concentrating on the construction industry. And so if you're out there and you need marketing help, reach out to us. We just announced another guy joined our team today, actually. So the bench is growing. We got a lot of experience, a lot of really cool strengths. I think it's a lot of momentum building, so it's exciting. So if you're out there needing any marketing support, reach out to us.
Very good. Well, welcome, Patrick. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you guys and talking more today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Likewise,
so,
man.
yeah, so tell us a little bit about kind of what you do, the area you play in construction. Your background a little bit.
Yeah, so my background, I've been started with a residential building component supplier, went to the general contractor side, went to the owner side, worked in the middle as a consultant, mostly for government and commercial, and earlier this year launched my own consulting firm where a lot of our service is geared towards private developers in terms of cost controls and independent financial due diligence on their construction projects. Ideally, we get involved in front to kind of set that expectation and get things in place, but it's very common that we get brought in kind of midstream and learn to adapt with the project as it's evolved so far and try and find fair and equitable ways to make sure that both the trades are being treated fairly as far as cash flow and change orders go, but at the same time being mindful of the owner's financial resources and that they're not being taken advantage of, for lack of a better word, when it comes to contract phase. So that's the main area. There are some kind of offshoots of that as it relates to independent estimating with government work, helping out trades specifically and contractors specifically. So it's all of it boils down to kind of lifting up the veil on construction costs and why things cost what they cost, which is often a black box. And I think the more and more you play around with it and think through it, it can be simplified to where it's not as overwhelming a topic or an equation. Essentially, that's basically what it is. It's math.
So I'm guessing however many years ago when you were graduating from...
When I left college, so I did intern at the building component manufacturer while I was in college. So I was kind of getting acclimated to the construction side. I would say, honestly, as recently as 4 years ago, when I was leaving the owner side, I didn't think that cost control, contract audit, any of that was where I was going, right? I knew I eventually wanted to be my own boss and open up my own shop. I didn't know what it would be. I thought, maybe owner's rep, independent estimating, something along that line. But as I got more and more involved in this space, I've found that there's a ton of value, tangible value, especially for owners where they can see the impact of having someone involved. And it's not like we're coming in to be the hammer, right? We're simply coming in to make sure that things are fair both ways. And these projects move very fast. And trades and contractors are pushed. You got to get a number in, and then they're going to own it. So their feet are being held to the fire. They're in a tough position as is, and so they have to get something documented and in. It's not good versus bad or any of that. It's just kind of having this independent checks and balances in place to let everyone else focus on what they're good at, and we can make sure that everyone's whole, both on the trade and on the owner side. So it's didn't have this plan 4 years ago, but it's something that I've really gravitated towards and I really enjoy.
One thing you said there is really trying to make sure it's, not a hammer, trying to make sure it's fair both ways. There's a lot of, I think most people in the industry want to be fair both ways, but there's always a stigma that the other side's trying to take advantage of them or get them, and they're almost having to play more defense because they think the other team's trying to take advantage of them or vice versa. And so I kind of really appreciate somebody come to that situation with like, all right, what's fair is fair. Like no one's trying to take advantage of each other. Fair pricing so that everyone makes a profit. Everyone, but at the same time, like all the contractors gonna make a profit. But at the same time, you can't, retire on one project and run an owner out of business either. Like it doesn't work that way. So
no, it can sometimes be contentious, and my approach to it is very much of like, okay, change order comes in. Let's talk through trade by trade. Let's just all agree on what the scope is, right? This is what was bought before. This is what's being bought now, right? Here's the takeoff. Here's the quantities. Here's the list of everything. This was added. This was deleted. Let's all agree on what the scope is first. And then we can talk about price and how we get to that number. But it's like too often someone will send a change order in, and the response from the owner or owner's rep or CM, whoever it is, the response is, this seems high. It's like, truthfully, it doesn't matter what it seems like, right? It really doesn't. It doesn't matter if it seems high or low. It's unless you can say with some confidence and fact as to why it's high or why it's low or why you think it should be what it is, then it's a subjective opinion that doesn't really add value and move the ball forward. And too often these change orders pile up and pile up and pile up, and then the approach is, okay, well, let's do a global settlement where we're going to take all these, lump them up, and can you guys take 10% off? Okay, and then next time the change orders come in, guess what? Right,
10% higher because they know they're going to get knocked down 10%.
They know they're going to have to give something back. Right, wrong, or indifferent, they're going to be asked to give something back, even if you can't make a case for why they should. And that's why I take all that. I'm not going to tell someone something seems high because put yourself in their shoes, right? That's kind of disrespectful that they take the time to put this together and you say it seems high for no reason. So the contracts are pretty straightforward. They tell you what needs to be in there, what you can and can't bill for, and the drawings fill out the rest of it. So you got to infer a little bit, but it's not. I think it's too often. It's a very niche skill set, and not a lot of people have the means of. It's a QC is essentially what it is. It's quality control and checking. So.
Yeah, well, I just got to say, I really like what you said there about, making sure that, both sides, like Matt said, both sides are being watched for, but also, from your perspective that, working with the owners and getting those kinds of comments about this seems high, because I've come across it so much too on projects, and it's usually, from what I've seen, it's usually from the owner's side, and it's somebody who really doesn't have a background or the skill set to be able to back up why they're saying it. And so as the construction manager, we kind of get stuck in the middle of this, between the contractor, in the relationship with the owner. And so like the owner says, well, this seems high. And it's like, well, what do you base that off of? Like, why do we think this is high? You don't have anything to back this up. So there's a lot of times there's not enough trust in those relationships. And a lot of, owners get screwed on things, and so they bring their baggage from one project to the next or one contractor to the next, and it's just not even fair a lot of the time.
It doesn't have to be. I mentioned good versus bad before, and this is something that I get hung up on a lot, and I think too often people feel there's that preconceived notion of us versus them, right? You're both in a contract with each other, and it's us versus them. It's like someone has to win and someone has to lose, which is not the case at all. Like everyone can be made whole. If there were so many bad people in the world that they were all trying to get one over on each other, like things would be a lot worse than they are, and they're not really that bad. So like I think most people are genuinely good natured, and these projects move fast. They're being asked to throw documentation out and get something approved that might sit there for a while, but they're being asked to do it on a quick timeline nonetheless. And then you get into price and proceed, and then work's been done, and now trades are financing the work, and then they get even more and more upset, rightfully so, if you don't have a good basis for why you want to question their cost, right?
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of change orders can be very touchy, and because they're dollars, right? And sometimes big dollars associated with it, and people don't necessarily understand them. And I think that's where the hang up is kind of being able to read and understand what you're being given to substantiate a cost.
So I've been on, I think, Kyle too, but I've been on both sides of the kind of the change order process. Like one from the subcontractor side, putting together the pricing, right, and actually, getting the change, the ASI or the the whatever came in, right, putting together the pricing and then submitting it. And now I'm on the owner's rep side, so I get the inverse, right? Now I'm seeing all the pricing come in from all the different trades, from the general contractor, yada yada, and I'm reviewing it all. And I mean, I've been guilty of the seems high comment on this side, and a lot of times to me, my response to seems high, or when I give that, it's because there's not really enough. You're not giving me enough information, enough backup to really help me understand why this thing's going to cost $100,000 when it on paper it looks minimal, right? Like I'm not saying that it is high, but it definitely seems high. So give me more information. So kind of from where you're sitting, maybe what are some ideas and tips of like what's the appropriate amount of backup that a contractor, because like subcontractors in general, they don't like to give, they want to give lump sum, right? $100,000. Ideally, that's what they want to give because they can't get nitpicked apart and whatever, right? But obviously, to help things flow, you got to give a good amount of backup. So what's some good tips like on the appropriate amount or how to show backup properly?
I think being able to break it down by task, right? Like, yeah, is it easy to send an email and say, all right, ASI 5, our cost is $80,000. Done. Cool. Like that's, if you can get it approved, more power to you. But in order to break it down, like I find when I do estimates, right? You can do it on the change order side, but when I'm doing independent estimating, I like to break it down each item as much as I can, right? Because it's when you see more detail and it's smaller numbers, yes, they add up to what you want, but it's palatable when you say, okay, yeah, we got a line item. Let's say we're going to add 1,000 feet of a drywall assembly, right? So you've got layout, you've got your material that shows up and it's got to go from wherever it's being dropped off to the other side of the site, right? You got to lay out your bottom track, you got to do your top track, studs, insulation, drywall, finish, tape. Like you can break it down line by line. There's a fine, I guess to that point, maybe you don't want to go so granular on it, but more detail it makes it easier. We go back to change orders, right? And not understanding necessarily what you're paying for if you're on the owner side, right? And so when you need to get your costs approved and you're on the trade side submitting something, give them the detail, show them as thorough within reason, right? Like don't make it an excruciating exercise on yourself, but a level of detail that helps them understand all the little steps that go into this that they might not be thinking of at surface level, right? Well, look, it's just a drawing. There's 100 feet of drywall. How hard could it be, right? And I think anyone that lives on the trade side and on the construction side knows that there's what the drawings show, and then there's all the other stuff that's not on the drawings that you actually have to do to get it done. And the people that don't have that trade-specific experience or construction, more in-depth construction experience, won't necessarily get there without kind of being helped along and say, oh yeah, right, I forgot that we've got to coordinate our conduit runs with where our sprinkler line is, and we got to work it around the duct, and we're in the electrical room now or the mechanical room, and yeah, on the drawing it just looks like it's one riser, right? But like this riser's got 10 elbows in it to fit around all the stuff that's in there. So it's kind of helping people make sense, break it down a little bit to where when it's one line item of 80,000, that's kind of hard to swallow, right? But if it's 5,000 here, if we got 80 hours for layout and shop fab or whatever, right? Kind of build it up, work your way up to it, and then it's easier to make sense of it bit by bit, as opposed to one big.
That's what I've always told people, kind of when I was on that side, and even now on this side, I'm like, if you help me, because everyone, if you're on the subcontractor side or the general contractor side, you don't really know the experiences and the knowledge of the in-person who's reviewing it. A lot of times, maybe even an owner, if they don't have an owner's rep, they don't really have construction knowledge sometimes. On the private side, they have general ideas, but even owner's reps, like my background's mechanical and plumbing and some civil, but I understand drywall, but I may not necessarily understand all the intricacies that go into that. Or another trade, I don't really understand the full process. So when you can tell a story in your pricing, we got to do this, and we got to do this, and we got to do this. Like, okay, well, a whole bunch of 4-hour activities adds up to a big number. If you just say it's going to take me 100 hours, like, okay, that seems like a lot. But and then also when you're pricing it on the subcontractor side, by telling that story, it helps you make sure you're not forgetting any steps too in your pricing activity. Because a lot of times you're not pricing it as brand new construction. Maybe something happened at that stage of the game. If you're not thinking through it all, maybe, getting material up to the floor, if you're putting a new, 100 foot of drywall on the 10th floor, well, before you could have, flown it up or done something different. But now, the elevator's not even commissioned. We're going to have to carry drywall up 10 flights of stairs. Like, okay, did you plan that out? Like, that's a lot of work. And then unless you're telling that story and thinking through it, you're even going to miss some pricing on your end.
Yeah. It all goes back to the stuff that's not on the drawings, right? Because people don't, it might be second nature. If you're on the trade side, this stuff runs through your head anyway when you're looking at the drawings. If you're on the owner side or a CM that has experience in a different discipline, it's not going to be at the forefront of your mind necessarily, right? And to kind of help them think through that process, what the full process is, not just what the drawings show, but what the full process is. Well, it tells the story, and it explains the math, right? Like a lot of what I do when I ask questions about this is like, here's my math, here's what I'm carrying for material, here's what I'm carrying for labor productivity in terms of hours per unit, here's the takeoff where I understand the changes are here, here, and here. Like, help me make sure I get everything right, that we're in agreement on what we're buying here, and then the rest of it should be able to walk through pretty easy. But there's always more. There's what the drawings show, and then there's always more. And I think that's what a lot of people maybe don't have as much. It's not at the forefront of their mind as often.
Right.
Yeah, well, definitely well said there, Patrick. There is always more, and like you said, anybody that's been in the trades or works in construction management, you see it firsthand. It's just part of it's just the nature of the job. And engineering side, they may not want to pay for a full design set of engineering documents because they're okay just having some more change orders in the field. There's so many different factors that come into the front end planning on a project that it's just to be expected to an extent. But I wanted to ask you, in your experience, it's a very general question, but would you say you see any trends or anything in estimating cost valuation that is, kind of a theme, if you will, if you keep coming across it for issues, problems, mistakes that get made a lot, anything that you see on the cost side for projects?
One of the things, I don't know if I would call it issues, but I think going back to the things that aren't on the drawings, it is very interesting to me to see the wildly different approaches that subcontractors take to indirect labor in means and methods. Not that there's a right or a wrong way, because it's surely not zero, right? It's not like it's a zero cost item, but some people will break it down task by task. Here's our material handling, here's our shop fab, here's cutting in the field, here's welded, blah, 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 line by line by line by line. And then you'll have others that will say, my indirect labor is X% of my direct journeyman labor, right? Like cleanup is 5%, safety is 2%, whatever it may be. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong way to do it. I think it's really company specific and their own experiences, right? And I think part of it, goes project to project and what's required of you from the contract, especially as it relates to like a cleanup crew or on-site foreman or project management, like those indirect labor items that are going to be required and how much is going to be required of them. So it's interesting to me the different approaches people take to that. Any other themes that
Are you still seeing escalation? No.
And there's some good resources out there. St. Louis Fed has some stuff where they do PPIs that kind of track commodities where you can look back. They're not exact, right? Because like it's going to vary region to region and stuff like that. And I know ENR puts out commodity indexes as well. Typically, for most commodities, there's some that are different, but generally speaking, like end of 2021 was really the peak, and most since then have kind of returned to a typical escalation, typical kind of 2, 3, 4% year over year. Some have dropped, but generally speaking, that volatility from early 2020 until the end of 2021 has generally gone away. But it is like when you get into the sophistication of estimating and setting stuff up, like that's one of the things that I think a lot of people need to be thoughtful of when you bid something, where you might not be doing the work until 18 months down the road, right? Your material's not going to cost what it is today when you go to buy it. If you're going to be on site 18 months from now, maybe you're buying it 12 months from now or 6, 14, whatever it is. Whenever you buy it in the future, same as labor, right? Like those things are going to go up, and being mindful of that as you kind of build your cost is very important.
Well, and that's a really interesting thing too, because I just remember doing that, having issues with that, especially around COVID time, because of all the unknowns that were happening with getting materials, getting manpower, and I mean, contractors were having a hard time. That was a tough time to be in the trades and try to manage through that.
I think that's where this fair and equitable approach makes it really shines through, because the contract is going to say what the contract says, but we all lived through that and know that contract language wasn't really grounded in reality of what the situation was. No one could have written this contract knowing that material prices are going to spike 50% in a 3-month window, right? You can't foresee that. So being able to substantiate it, like, look, we get it. We're sympathetic to the idea that material is a lot more than what you could have reasonably thought it would be. So kind of show us where you started, right? What you allowed for it. Show us what it is now, and we'll help you. We'll cover, like, do you split it? Do you fund it wholly? Leave that up to them to decide. But that's one of those things where the contract is going to say what the contract says, but you need to kind of ground your approach in reason.
Right. So you're involved in a couple associations, and we said in the intro you're speaking at NACA. What topics do you like to speak about? What are you talking about?
So at NACA, that's the National Association of Construction Auditors. Meeting in September down in Durham, and I've been involved with them for a few years now, and a lot of the folks there are more geared towards the audit and accounting side, whereas my skill set is kind of related, right? And that it's kind of like micro audits in real time via the change order process and labor rates. But what I talk through there often is kind of the approach to change orders, and how do we take a dispassionate and factual approach to reviewing them and validating them. It's not emotional. I'm not biased. I don't get paid more or less depending on what I find. It's just like walk through the process of how we review it. And I think it's with their accounting background, it's a little bit of a breath of fresh air for me to bring the estimating and then kind of cost engineering side of it to the discussion. But it's a really experienced group of individuals. And I remember between NACA, which is the one in September, and then the Construction Audit and Cost Control Institute, which is another group I'm part of. Being involved in these two, I've come across folks that have been living in this world for longer than I've been alive, like in the audit and cost control world for longer than I've been alive, which is kind of funny because like we talked about before, I didn't even know I was interested in this or that it existed until 4 years ago. A really robust wealth of knowledge to lean on. So if anyone's interested in that type of field, audit, cost control, anything like that, or even if there's contractors that go to NACA, owners reps, independent auditors, agencies, all of them. I'm sure anyone in the construction industry could probably take something away from it.
Yeah. So you got into the costing side a few years back, and then you started your own business this year. It sounds like, is that correct? In February, right?
Yeah, earlier this year in February. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the drive to do that? What made you want to go off on your own?
So getting exposed to this side of the construction world and as an independent consultant to owners, I really believe in the value that's there, especially for ownership, right? For them to be able to preserve their contingency and preserve their capital and get the most value out of it that they can. When we get involved and help them with the change order process and cost controls and allow their money to stretch, and they see, okay, this change order, let's say on a given project, we've reviewed 5 to 6 million worth of change orders in the last 6 months. We've helped them save in that number $600,000 to $700,000. So it's 600 to 700 of it's a large project, but so percentage-wise, not a big number. Percentage of contingency, it's high, and at the end of the day, it's still at $600,000 or $700,000 regardless. So I really firmly believe that there's a lot of value in it. I think it's a skill set that not a lot of people have, especially where it's the contract side, it's the estimating side, and then having the ability to kind of manage what can be a contentious discussion, right? But to talk through it, look, we're not here to be the hammer, right? And knock the head. We're trying to just make sure everyone's whole. And it takes a lot. There's some learning experiences I had early on where maybe came in a little stronger than I should have, and I've since adjusted my temperament, gotten a little wiser in my age. But yeah, at the end of the day, I believe in the service. I know it's a value, and the feedback I kept getting from clients was positive, and I figured I should bet on myself and see if it pans out. So
when you go, I've been on a lot of contentious discussions on, project sites, and a lot of them, the most contentious ones are usually around money, right? One or another, a budget, and, especially change orders, and because, everyone thinks everyone's screwing each other all the time. So how do you what's some tips of how to enter those conversations and really get everybody to kind of come to the table, talk through it without, fighting and without, just the mess that they can become?
You got to focus on the facts. Focus on the facts. Like that is, get everyone to agreement as to what this change order is capturing, right? What are we buying here? Because too often you'll have, someone thinks that they need a credit for this, and this, but well, by the time you gave us this change, we had already framed that wall or run all that duct. So we can't offer you a credit. In fact, now it's a cost because we got to take it out because something else needs to go there. And it's so getting to an agreement on scope and fact, and then the rest of it, once you get that settled, it's really math, right? Like you can break down, okay, this drywall assembly is, let's say it's $10.23 a square foot, whatever. Like of that,
Yeah.
we know this portion is material, right? We got 2 layers of drywall, insulation, stud, and top and bottom track, right? We can add that up per square foot, it's X. You're telling me that your carpenter, your blended crew rate is Y, right? So if you back that in, how many hours are we saying per unit of measure? If you're telling me that your blended crew rate is $60 and it's $6 an hour or $6 a unit for labor, then you're telling me that, 0.1 man hours is how long this unit takes. Does that make sense, right? Sometimes it's as simple as we've had change orders where if you just take what's presented, there was a masonry one, for example, big stair enclosure wall that was going up. They told us how many blocks they had. They went through all the detail, broke it all down. Here's our material handling. Here's the grouting and infill. Here's the reinforcement. Here's the bond beams, scaffolding, blah, 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 whole thing. But if you just focus in on a couple of the big areas, you say, okay, we've got, I don't remember the exact number. Let's say it's 4,000 blocks of CMU, right? And we do a takeoff, and it's like, all right, yeah, we're generally in that number. So we're fine there. And material cost for the block, we're fine with that. And then if you look at the man hours associated with it, and then just do the math, right? Like do the inverse of, okay, we agree on how many blocks there are. And you're telling me there's, I can't remember the exact number, but it worked out to where the implied productivity was 1 block being put in place every 15 minutes. And like there's line items for all the other stuff, for placing, for material handling, for all that. It's like, okay, you got labor for all these other things, but you're telling me that while these guys are on the scaffold, they're going to put 1 block in place every 15 minutes. And you could say it seems high, but in an instance like that, you can go to RS means, and RS means is, take it with a grain of salt, right? Like it's a reference point, not the gospel. But you can use your sense of, does 1 block per 15 minutes make sense? And when you go look at what RS means says, right, it doesn't really jive with that either. So it gives you a basis and logic and fact to say, look, we got to talk more about how you get to these man hours, because I'm struggling to make sense of it, right? So it's like, don't make it emotional. Don't make it you're charging me too much and this seems high. It's like, I help me understand this line item and how you get to these hours. I'm not saying it's wrong, but like, I can't get there in my head. So
I like that approach, because there's been times too when I'm like, man, this seems crazy. Like 15 minutes a block, like what am I missing? And they explain to me, and there's like something I was missing. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense. Other than just saying like, hey man, you got to knock this out. You're completely taking advantage of us. Or you're coming out with that approach, right? Like,
and if they didn't have all those other line items, I probably would have looked at it a lot differently, right? But you've got labor on every other line item, and then you've got this one that it's being able to read it, honestly, when it comes to the change orders. Each trade has their own nomenclature and way of presenting data. It's all its own little language. So kind of understanding what you're looking at and how the pieces fit together, and then being able to take that, but also reference it against the drawings from the takeoff and quantifying side, and kind of marry those ideas together and make sure that everything ties. It's each one's like its own little puzzle, basically. So
yeah, well, and kind of a little bit back to something you said earlier, Patrick, talking about fluctuations and you just reminded me, I've seen owners make mistakes a lot where, because they've done a project before, now they're an estimator in their mind, and they think they can just pull the same chunk of a project scope and say, well, this is what it was last time, so this is what it's going to be again, not taking into account the fluctuations in materials and manpower, the increases in the union dues. I mean, all those things that come up that people don't take into account. They just want to throw it on the paper and then get the number, get the budget approved, and move on. But they're not taking the right factors into play.
You can really boil it down to a few main components, right? You've got material, labor, and equipment. Equipment, set it aside, because like that you can kind of put on your own separate line item anyway. So let's just focus on material and labor, right? material, you've got straight up the cost of whatever material is you're buying, stud, conduit, pipe, wire, whoever. If you're accounting for an escalation, right? Because maybe you're pricing it now to do it in 2 weeks on a change order, or maybe you're pricing it to do it 18 months from now as part of a project. You've got your waste factor, depending on what the type of project is. Like if it's some odd height drywall assembly where you're gonna, let's say it's 19 feet, right, and you can only fit 8-foot sheets in the elevator or up the stairs, so now you've got 30% waste, where maybe on the other job you had 10%, right? Or when you get to the labor component of it, you've got your baseline of, okay, for stud, drywall, insulation, and finishing, it's going to be 0.1 hours per square foot, right? But maybe it's on a military base, and so they've got to go through checkpoints. Maybe it's phased work. Maybe it's night work. Maybe it's cramped space, so you're working around other trades. Mm-hmm. So there's a productivity and inefficiency factor that goes into it, right? And then there's union versus non-union. There's subsistence pay for people that if they're out in the middle of nowhere working on a job, right? To get them out there, you got to pay them. There are so many variables. Like those are just like kind of the high level. You can go as deep as you want, but even on a high level, there's 3 to 4 components for material and labor that you tweak them just a little bit from one instance to another, and it can really change your cost. You can't really just translate, okay, we did a fitness center in this building and the electrical was $30 a square foot, so we're going to carry $30 a square foot over here. It's like, well, that was a brand new one from Shell. Mm-hmm. Over here, you're demoing out a tenant space and building a new one, so it's not $30 a square foot.
Well, and I think we talked about it before, Matt, but it's that old adage. Whenever somebody tells me it's just like the last one, I'm like, I doubt it. It never is. Whenever they say it's a copy or we already did this, no, 9 times out of 10, that's not the case.
Is it ever that easy?
Yeah, never.
Yeah, that's not. I mean, it would be great if it was, but yeah.
Well, we're going to do a word association game in a minute, but this being the CM mentors, we really try to kind of give back to the next generation, and this kind of you've fallen into a niche within construction that's a lot of people probably don't even know exists, right? There's I've had this thesis that I wanted to write a book or do something about 1,000 ways to make it in the construction industry, and having all these little, these ways you can make it, because construction industry is not just swinging hammers, right, and doing that sort of stuff. There's so much more. So who would be, if somebody's out there in college and they don't even know this exists, who would be the perfect fit, you think, that could follow this, and how, do you have any piece of advice to how to go down this path into this kind of sort of role?
I think a lot of what I lean on, there's the construction and estimating side, but a lot of what I lean on is logic and data and problem solving. So yeah, science and engineering really lend itself to that. I would say in terms of kind of how you end up down this path, I think there's people that would have a great opportunity to excel here are folks coming from a general contractor side or a trade side, 3, 4, 5 years of experience. It's very important being able to understand how the construction process works on site. Yeah. Because if we want, going back to some of the themes we've talked about, there's so much more to the actual work getting done than what's on the drawings. And no one knows that better than the people that are on site and see it every day. And so being able to have that frame of reference when you're evaluating and making heads and tails of costs is very important. So it's definitely I think going from the contractor side to this role where you have that experience and have that background would really lend itself. The engineering side of things, I'm not an engineer, but I like to think that I think like one. In terms of,
despite what your fake resume says that I was given.
Yeah. If I knew it was going to make up, I would have put a lot more on there. But
Alex is crying in the background.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a niche. It's not for everyone, because there's plenty of times where I know that I'm going to go into meetings and conversations and it's going to be contentious. And I've actually changed my approach to how I do this to kind of skirt that a little bit. We'd get change orders and we'd say, all right, you're telling us it's X. Here's our valuation and it's Y. And we're disagreeing on these line items. And what I found, let's say that the change order is submitted at 100K, and because of whatever reason, I'm saying I think it's worth $25,000 or $30,000. You get this sizable delta, and it just throws up a wall, right? It pretty much has a really good chance of stopping the conversation before you can even have a productive discussion. So I've stopped doing that, and instead I go back to what we talked about before. Let's just talk through the facts, talk through the scope. Let's all agree on what should be included here. And then once you get that set, you can kind of come to an agreement on what it should cost, because we all know what we're buying. So how do we price it?
Yeah. That's it.
Seems to me there's a lot of hard skills that go into it, right? And knowing how stuff gets built, kind of understanding you're playing detective a lot of times and really trying to understand. But it's probably 50-50 with that, 50-50 with soft skills, because most of the stuff you're doing is you're coming into these situations and you're not negotiating them down, but you're still trying to talk through it. And there is a sense of negotiation in the air.
You definitely need the hard skills, because you need to, if you go into a meeting with a trade and you try and explain how their stuff is built and you know what you're talking about, right? They'll sniff that out real quick. It's not hard. So I will be the first to say that I'm not an expert in every trade. I know enough to talk high level about most scopes and most trades.
Yeah.
Do I know exactly how certain HVAC pieces and equipment work? No, I don't. Truthfully, I don't. But I can talk how they work together and how the electrical systems tie into them and where the circuit comes from and all that, and piece it together. And so being able to have that hard skill side and technical side, but the soft skill of there's some things that we're going to flag that we might flag them simply to say, we don't agree with this, but in this instance, it amounts to $500. So is it worth making us think about right now? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
Is it worth flagging so that maybe on a future one, when it amounts to $10,000? Sure. It's we'll make the note of it just so it's not, this was approved before, so we're going to keep doing it this way. We'll make the comment, but it's that give and take. Is the juice worth the squeeze, right? I say that a lot to clients. Do we want to push on this? If you're going to keep spending time to resolve this, and if it's $500 or $1,000 and you got to pay me to go look at it again, and they come back halfway, then at best you're breaking even, right? At best. So let's make a note, move on, and kind of fair and equitable, right? Be mindful of where it makes sense to push and where it doesn't.
Well, I feel vindicated because a lot of my best practices of how I handle that sort of stuff is exactly how a professional does it too. So
you can't fight all of them, man.
No, 100% not. You can't. So let's jump into the word association game. And so this is actually a good one with you, because just kind of some of the words we typically do. But so the idea is to throw out a word, and kind of the first thing that pops in your mind, blurt it out. Don't think about it too hard.
Okay.
And it's kind of a fun little topic. So first word is change order.
Necessary evil.
I like it. Estimate.
Best guess.
I like that too. GC.
Ringleader.
I thought you were going to say necessary evil. OSHA.
Damn.
That's a good one right there. Damn.
It's the same response everyone's given.
Honestly, like luckily, I don't have to get involved with it too much.
Yeah.
Overhead.
What do you? I do like that. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but the last one's BIM.
Expensive.
So let's talk about OSHA and safety. Do you see? I've seen it done a bunch of different ways. How do people account, or what's your best practice for accounting for safety in a change order?
So
the cost of safety, specifically.
This is my opinion. Not all my clients agree with this take, and this is one of those things where it's do we push on it or do we not? Because usually it's a percentage of the labor from the change order, right? So 2-3%, whatever it is.
Yeah.
A lot of the indirect labor, supervision, project management, safety, cleanup, laborers, stuff like that. I prefer to start the conversation with like the subcontract agreement will typically require that to be in place through the duration of the job, right? So unless the change order coming from the sub or the GC, includes an extension to the schedule, I'm personally not of the opinion that there's added man hours for a safety supervisor, right? Like, because you were on the drywall guy, let's say the drywall guy is going to be on site from January to December, right? And now, yeah, we're staffing it up and we're going to capture more scope in this January to December period. And maybe we've got an extra foreman because now we've got 20 guys on site instead of 10. The safety side of it, right? Like you had a safety person, you had a project manager from beginning to end. If there's a schedule extension, I feel differently.
Yeah.
This very much though falls into the category of do we want to push on it? And often owners will let them have it because in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. Often, but like kind of my opinion from a contract side of things and from if we step back and okay, we're going to build our estimate and the general conditions at the subcontract level for PM, foreman, truck, tools, safety are functions of time. They're functions of a duration, typically. That's how I view it. So if the duration hasn't changed, then has the cost changed? Now, more often than not, you can present it and get it approved, right? So
I've seen it.
That's probably not going to be a popular answer to some people, but that's just kind of when I think of it. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it. And like I said, when I ask questions on change orders, that's what it is. Tell me if I'm missing something. But when I view it from a high level of, okay, safety is a cost derived from time. If the time didn't change, then how does I get there's more people on the job.
Yeah.
But are there more safety people on the job? I don't know.
I've seen it, when I was on the subcontractor side, I was on a project where the GC basically said, no, that's part of your, your field overhead, right? That's part of your 10% field overhead markup that you're allowed, right? That's your safety consumables, that's your whatever. And I was working with kind of a hard-headed guy, and he's like, okay, if you exclude doing this work safely, I can exclude it. And like, it was kind of anyway, it was a fun conversation, to say the least.
One note on that. So we've talked a lot about change orders, but if there's one thing that I could change about the change order world, it's that it never ceases to amaze me how most contracts do very little to address and define the expectations for how change orders are going to be priced. It's typically, okay, you can do a T&M, lump sum, or give us a breakdown and we'll approve it. But that leaves so much up for interpretation. Change orders happen on every job. The necessary evil happens on every job. And we know it's going to happen. And we don't do a lot to kind of set the process for it until it's too late. Because once the contract's signed, you're not going to go back and relitigate it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, usually the contract line in the contract's, 2 sentences, and it basically says your allowable overhead and profit markup, and give adequate amount of backup. What does that mean? Just something like that.
What is overhead? What is in
yeah? What all this? Exactly.
The subcontracts usually do a lot better job of defining what's in there. Contractors are smart and they get it. They'll spell that out. Overhead is often anything above a foreman. Hand tools, PPE, stuff like that. Overhead. They'll define it. Whereas like the main contract typically doesn't. Just leaves it very open-ended, and you put all this stuff in there, put all this detail in there, and hey, contract doesn't say that it's overhead, so charge for it.
Kyle, you want to take us away?
Yeah, sounds good. Well, yeah, thanks so much, Patrick, for having being on the show today. It was great talking with
Definitely,
you. We had some really good talks, change orders, fluctuations, how to do things properly, some of the stuff, the owners, the trades. It was a really good mix of conversations. So it was really fun to hear your perspective on things, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. It was I always enjoy sharing kind of my perspective on things. I know it's not how everyone else views it, but like I said, I'm always open to. It was good to kind of hear your guys' experience on that side as well, because it's different for everyone.
So, anything you want to plug, or any conferences to go meet you at, or ways people can get in touch with you if they want to, talk to you about change orders?
Yeah, so website is reisercc, reisercc.com. Phone number and emails on there. Feel free to reach out as needed. Find me on LinkedIn. Anyone that's interested in learning more about, I know it sounds nerdy, right? Contract audit. Maybe I'm biased.
It is.
It is nerdy. It's the nerd herd.
It's a necessary evil.
It is. It happens on every job, right? And I think there's a lot of value, and it's again, we're not out to be the police, right? And like get people to do stuff for 50 cents on the dollar. It's just level playing field. There's a lot of great people to meet and skills to learn from being part of NACA, National Association of Construction Auditors, and CACI, CAACCI, Contract Audit and Cost Control Institute. Recommend both of them very highly. I'm active in them. I'll stay active in them just because of how much I've gained from them. So if you're interested in learning more, I would encourage you to go there as well.
Awesome, man.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, guys.
All right. Don't forget to like us, follow us, and share. And be sure to get in touch if you have anything else you want to talk to Patrick about. So,
thanks, Patrick. Always good chatting with you, man.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Yeah, thanks.